Hi everyone and welcome to Studio Jake. I of course am your host Jacob Airy. Welcome to the next installment of Comics, Cartoons, and Coffee, where we talk about my two favorite topics, comic books and all the media related to them, as well as some of my favorite cartoons, all while enjoying some coffee. It's iced. Does it make the slosh sound like last week's? So today I wanted to talk about one of my all-time favorite animated series, and that of course is Nickelodeon's Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's just recently been uploaded to Netflix, so if you haven't watched the show, this will have spoilers. I'm not going to do the whole timestamp thing where I have spoilers here and you jump ahead. How I'm going to talk about it, there's just going to be spoilers all throughout, so I just want to give you a fair warning. There is going to be a lot of spoilers in this conversation. So spoiler, warning. This is your spoiler warning. For those of you unfamiliar, Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's over 60 episodes. It is a fantasy series. Some people have compared it to anime and how the story proceeds, some of the themes in it. Even the artwork has been compared to anime, and it does have a lot of those influences. To start out, I want to talk more about the story. Aang, he is the last airbender. His whole kind has been wiped out by the firebenders, which is attacking the rest of this world. It's attacking the water nation, it's attacking the earth nation. They've succeeded in defeating the air nation. They are just on the march. Now, the Avatar is this person who is endowed with all four elements, so air, water, fire, earth, and can enter an avatar state where they can control all of them. They go through this cycle of reincarnation, so it can be a waterbender is their main power. In this case, Aang, it's air. And the Fire Nation has been looking for the airbender for a long time. They think he's an old man at this point, but what actually happened was Aang had put himself and his flying bison pet named Appa in stasis to hide. But they're discovered by Sokka and Katara, who are members of the Northern Water Tribe, and they go on this quest with Aang, and they are the main characters throughout Book 1, or Season 1, but they're all called books, so that's how I'm going to address them. You have Book 1 is mainly them avoiding Zuko and his uncle Iroh, and they are members of the Fire Nation. They are trying to track down Aang, and Zuko has this major daddy issue where he wants to please his father, who is the Fire Lord, and is voiced by Mark Hamill, by the way. He is one of my all-time favorite voice actors. I just think he's phenomenal. He, of course, voiced the Joker in the greatest animated series of all time, Batman the Animated Series. So he's the Fire Lord. In the first two books, he doesn't appear a whole lot. He becomes more of a main character in Book 3. So anyway, Aang, Sokka, Katara, they're traveling around with Aang, and Aang has already been all over the world. The Air Nation, they were nomads that had these bases in certain areas, but they had been all over the place. And Aang, he's showing Sokka and Katara, who have never left the Northern Tribe, where to go, how to find resources, how to go from town to town, all while avoiding bounty hunters from the Fire Nation, as well as Zuko and Iroh. One of the cool things about Book 1 is you really see the dynamic between Zuko and Aang. And Aang, of course, grew up. He's a little kid, and he's very happy-go-lucky, and he just wants to do the right thing. And Zuko is the total opposite. He is angry, he's headstrong, and he wants to prove himself to his father, who has kind of sent him into exile. They also have to deal with this Fire Nation general who wants to basically take Zuko's place and perhaps stage a coup. They don't really explore that, but it's definitely hinted. But he wants to become the Fire Lord. It's kind of obvious if you watch the show. So then it transitions into Book 2, where the Fire Nation tries to invade the Water Nation. Aang learns how to waterbend during this whole thing. Katara becomes a better waterbender, and Sokka, who does not have bending powers, he becomes a better martial artist and a better fighter. He has all these really cool weapons that are built from bone. I believe in Book 3 he gets this really cool sword, but anyway. Two, it's that transition. Aang has to learn how to earthbend now. He's learned how to waterbend. He's a master at airbending. So now he has to learn how to earth. And at first he goes see a friend of his named Bumi, who's the king of this city. But unfortunately, the Fire Nation has taken it over. And now, of course, Bumi isn't Aang's age anymore. He's way older. And so he tells Aang he's going to stay behind in his city and try to help liberate it. So they find Toph, who is a blind earthbender, and she's a master at it. She's probably 12 years old, but she can earthbend better than any of the master earthbenders. So she is kind of pampered. Her family is very wealthy in the Earth Nation, but she decides to go with Aang and his friends and teach Aang earthbending. And at first she's kind of rough and mean with him, but then she realizes he responds to positivity because he's an nomad, and so she starts being more positive with him, and of course he picks it up pretty quickly. Zuko was still on his rampage, although they kind of transition him and Iroh into a different story arc, and we actually see Zuko kind of gets his own story arc, and in one episode he gets it all to himself, which is really cool. And you get to explore more of his character. Zuko has this girlfriend named Mai, and she gets recruited by Azula. They kind of become the main antagonist to Aang and his friends. And that transitions into Book 3, where the Fire Lord is building his ultimate scheme to just scorch the earth. And I tell you, it is one of the coolest story arcs to come. It is really cool. It has some of the great story arcs. Now, more specifically, there was one thing that I wish they had done differently in this series, which they have a sequel series where they do this, but it's of course Legend of Korra. That's coming to Netflix as well. I'll probably eventually do a separate video on Legend of Korra. If you would like to see that, let me know in the comments below. For now, I'm going to stick with The Last Airbender. But there's a scene where Aang encounters this ancient giant turtle. You find out in this world's lore that humanity used to live on these turtles, and these mystical turtles are what gave the benders their abilities, including the very first Avatar, who started out as a firebender. And Aang meets with this turtle and gets some wisdom from him, and the turtle touches Aang, and it kind of unlocks some new abilities for him. Now, what I think the show should have done is they should have, when the turtle did that, because it releases this energy, they should have brought back the airbenders via that way. So people who didn't have bending abilities, all of a sudden they become airbenders. Now, like I said, they do that in Legends of Korra, but I think it would have been more meaningful if it had happened in this show. That's just my opinion. I think that they should have done that. Why did I go through the story like I did? It's because it is such an amazing story. You follow these kids basically on this journey. It's basically a 3-season coming of age story where they learn how to be warriors, and that sometimes they have to make hard decisions. They can't always be kids. They can't always be children. Sometimes they have to make adult decisions because the world is hanging in the balance. And I think that is something that is meaningful. It's something that is important, because especially with kids today, you see that people my age, I'm turning 30, I'm a member of the millennial era, and we see these perpetual children who don't want to grow up. And one of the good things about Avatar is it teaches you sometimes you do have to grow up. But that doesn't mean changing who you are. It just means growing in wisdom. It means growing in knowledge and having the wisdom to implement that knowledge. And it's something that is incredible. And one thing I do like about it is you see the characters. Not everything is happy. They definitely aren't Mary Sue's. If you've watched any of my previous other podcasts or projects, you know I hate Mary Sue's. They drive me crazy. Or Gary Sue's, if you don't want me to be sexist. You know that they drive me crazy. And in this show, the characters aren't like that. They go through problems, they go through issues, they have conflicts between each other, but then they learn to overcome that. They have this big coming of age maturity that is really strong. Man, I really miss the slurping sound. Now, I want to talk about some of the relationships in the show. As you know, especially if you've seen Legend of Korra, Aang ends up falling in love with Katara, even though she's probably about technically 3 years older than him. Although Aang technically is older, he was just kept in stasis because he created this ice thing. Sokka ends up with this girl named Suki. Originally, he dated a girl who turned out to be the moon spirit. Boy, was that awkward when she turned back into the moon. And then Zuko, of course, I mentioned his girlfriend Mai. Toph is kind of left twisting in the wind. So, and then you find out in Legend of Korra, she goes through like 5 divorces. I'm exaggerating. It was 2. Still, we're like, come on, let her be happy. Gee whiz. So there's like this debate in the fandom that the characters should have ended up with different people. So like Sokka and Suki, pretty much everyone really likes them together. There's not really an alternative girl for Sokka. But as far as Aang and Katara, a lot of fans think that Katara should have ended up with Zuko, or Toph should have ended up with Zuko. There are some fans who think that Aang should have ended up with this smaller character named Coco, who has a small appearance as they're traveling through the Earth Nation. And she's just this darling little girl who's has this huge crush on Aang. I think she only appears in 1 or 2 episodes, but there's like this fan contingency there, like, we wanted her with Aang, and I don't blame them. It was really cute. That was just some fan insight I wanted you to hear. Personally, I actually agree with the people who think Katara should ended up with Zuko, because I don't really like Mai as a character, even though she kind of goes through, because she's really mean and vicious. She's basically a valley girl, and you don't really like her even after her redemption arc, because she kind of goes through this redemption thing where she betrays Azula. You still don't really like her. Zuko started out as a homicidal maniac. He doesn't actually kill anyone in the show, but he definitely has no problem with killing people. But you never actually see him do this. Mai, like I said, she's just kind of a vicious person. But probably one of the best relationships in the show is between Uncle Iroh and Zuko. And it's really a contrast, because all Zuko wants is to please his father. That's like the theme throughout Book 1 and even a lot of Book 2. It comes to this place where he realizes his father doesn't really see him as a son. And even though he betrays Uncle Iroh at one point, and for those of you who have not seen the series, I can't do it justice how great of a character Uncle Iroh is. He's just this wise, sweet old man who is just trying to take care of his nephew. And what you don't realize until later in the show is the reason Uncle Iroh takes care of Zuko so much is Uncle Iroh lost his son in one of the worst ways possible. And so Zuko has lost his father, but in kind of a selfish way for his father's part, not for Zuko's part. And so Iroh kind of adopts him as a surrogate son, and it's not till later that Zuko kind of sees Iroh as an adoptive father, and there's this really, really sweet moment when Zuko finally realizes that he's been doing the wrong thing for so long. In the show, Zuko actually betrays Iroh, and Iroh gets thrown in prison as a traitor. And Zuko realizes this, but Iroh manages to escape. And when Zuko joins Team Avatar, he gets this opportunity to see him. And he goes to him and he's like, I'm so sorry. And at first, Iroh's not facing him. And you think that Iroh doesn't want to talk to him. And Zuko's like, I understand if you don't want to forgive me. I get it. I get it if you're still angry. And then all of a sudden, Iroh just embraces him and said, I wasn't angry. I was afraid that you had lost your way. And like, I'm an older millennial, so I was almost in college when I was watching the show, and I was like, I'm not crying, you're crying. It was a truly emotional moment. And like, it's so funny because my wife, she was younger when she was watching the show, and she was like watching it with her mom. And her mom, my mother-in-law, she was even like, oh my gosh, this is so emotional, because it is just this incredibly well done scene. It's shot so well. And the contrast between Zuko being the son of this selfish aristocrat and then the nephew of this humble, kind ex-general, this veteran, and you see how he's conflicted and he's constantly torn between the state of good in his heart and the state of evil in his heart. And it's something that you see change in him, and especially when he joins Team Avatar. And at first, Team Avatar has trouble trusting him, right? But that all changes later on, and it's something that is really powerful about the show. As for the production values of the show, it's really well made. The voice actors are chosen to perfection. The animation team at Nickelodeon should all be applauded. And I believe the show won awards when it was airing, and it deserved every single one of them. It is so amazing, and I really think that this show is something that will define a generation, kind of like Batman the Animated Series and X-Men the Animated Series defined the 90s kids. I mean, as far as nerds, I'm not talking about of all time or whatever, but I would say that Avatar is a generation defining show in that regard, and it's something that's going to be much beloved. And you can see that because Nickelodeon continued the saga, right? They did a whole bunch of spin-off comic books, and I believe the first volume of the comic books were kind of met with some resistance because it didn't have Toph. That would make me mad as well. And also, it had a really bad film remake from M. Night Shyamalan. If you would like me to do a video about that, let me know. But I'll do it unwillingly, but if you want me to rewatch that movie and do it, I will. You just gotta let me know in the comments below. And it also had a sequel series, The Legend of Korra. Now, I thought the first two books of Legend of Korra had 4 instead of 3. And I thought the first 2 were good, but after that I felt like it went off the rails just a little bit. And my wife hates The Legend of Korra. She is a diehard fan of the first show, and she can't stand it. And she'll tell anyone who will listen. Oh, trust me, I've heard the TED Talk like 3 or 4 times. I love you, honey. Back to Avatar, The Last Airbender. Just a... My cabbages! One final note before I close this stream of consciousness is the animal characters. That is something that is very hit or miss in television shows. You've got Doug, which has Pork Chop, really great. And then you have, I hate to use this example, but it's true, you have Transformers, where the humans are kind of like the animal character. Because, you know, you've got the giant Autobots, then you've got these tiny humans. So, like, Transformers Armada is a good example of them doing it poorly. Transformers Robots in Disguise, them doing it correctly. Same with Generation 1. But anyway, it's very hit or miss. But they've got Appa in Avatar The Last Airbender, who is this giant bison who flies them around. He has airbending powers like Aang. He is just the sweetest pet you could possibly imagine. Right along with Momo, who is this lemur bat thing. And he is the sweetest thing. He follows them around. They have these pets there. At one point, there's the story arc where Appa gets kidnapped, and your heart just breaks. You just want Aang to find Appa, because he's been his longest friend, especially after losing the Air Nation, that, you know, you just fall apart. And I'm even having trouble talking about it without tearing up a little bit, because it's like a frightening story arc. You're like, are they going to kill Appa? And it's really, really tough to watch. And with Momo, there's this really humorous episode where they find these cactuses, and Sokka eats some of the stuff in the cactus, and Momo does as well, but it makes them hallucinate, and they start to act kind of high. It was a really funny episode, and it was like a bonding moment for Sokka and Momo, and it was really funny because they're like moving all around, and then there's this thing where Momo would do this like dance, and it was kind of fun and funny. So I wanted to do that as kind of an honorable mention. I hope you liked my Avatar The Last Airbender stream of consciousness, like I called it earlier. I didn't really want to do a review. I just wanted to talk about why I liked it, why I think it's important, why it's iconic, and it all comes down to the story, the relationships, the production values, and yes, their animal pets. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like it. Hit that subscribe button, leave me a comment below, that always helps in the algorithm. Share it out, and visit my website, StudioJakeMedia.com. I have links to all my social media there, so definitely check it out, and I'll see you next time right here on Studio Jake.